Hey there, thank you for clicking on this video. This might be an abrupt start to this video because this was a continuation from the Ask Me Anything with Francois Chole, the creator of Keras himself. The video was done in one go. It was one live stream, hence there's an abrupt starting. Hence I'm recording a separate intro. This video goes over the first 2 or 3 chapters of the book. And if you'd like to be a part of this series, you can find a link in the description where you can sign up for the meetup. All are recorded. Everyone is welcome. You need to own a copy of Deep Learning with Python 2nd edition to join the group. Apart from that, anyone and everyone is welcome. We'll be going through and understanding concepts in sequential order. And for now, I'll let you watch the video. Awesome. I'll assume everyone can see my screen, and I've already gone through the first half of the exciting bit, which was the Ask Me Anything with Francois, but I'll still remind everyone of the agenda. We're reading this incredible book. I took a really long trip to get that picture clicked. This is from my home state, so I hope everyone likes this picture a bit. Sorry for the nerdy details. But here's the agenda for today. We'll be going through the book title, Deep Learning with Python. I'll, as an honor code to everyone joining these sessions, the future ones will be live streamed to YouTube, and I would request everyone to purchase a copy. Any sharing of the book will not be tolerated in the group. I will be going through the chapters in sequential order, summarizing different concepts. And for today, we'll aim for chapter 1 to 5. I'll try to summarize the different concepts in there and do a code walkthrough of the chapters. So here is the outline of the entire book. And as you can see, it's about 14 chapters. I want to remind everyone that our sessions are open to everyone. Anyone and everyone is welcome to join, which also means that I will pace this according to an intermediate practitioner, which means I'll be going over a few details that are introductory. And I'll slow down at places where I take longer to read something. So if I take 15 minutes to read something, I'll assume the audience would require 5. At that point, I'll highlight a concept. And I mentioned this point because I'm not sure if you can see any similarities with me holding up my cup. But I am not a Keras expert. I have been spending a lot of time in PyTorch, but I always wanted to pick up Keras. And I'm using this as an excuse to learn Keras myself. Francois mentioned the technique of Feynman to teach something that you've just learned. I take that quite to my heart and seal this opportunity at my work also to teach everyone of things I'm learning. And I'm sure I saw a lot of familiar names in the question and answers. I'm sure all of you would understand that I'm mad passionate about this, and I bring these topics to you because I would absolutely love any feedback, and I'm always happy to answer any questions. So if you think I skip any details, if I don't know any answer, I'll come back and answer it in the next session. But I really, really encourage you to please ask any or all of your questions that you might have. I'm happy to go into them. So here's how I'll structure this reading group. We'll be going through all of these chapters in sequential order, and the first 5, or actually the first 7, are quite introductory and they're self-paced. So I would encourage you all to spend some time reading the theory. I'll try to summarize the essential amounts of theory, the one that needs some explanation, and the one that's self-explanatory. I'll glance over it. And after that, we'll be going through the Colab notebooks. Actually, the GitHub repository has been open sourced by Francois in the Keras repo, I believe. And I'll be doing a code walkthrough of individual cells for every single chapter and explaining different concepts. I also, as I mentioned earlier, love the Kaggle world. We'll be also looking at a few Kaggle examples, and I've been reaching out to a few Keras experts. Akash and Sayak, I'm sure the people from the Keras world would recognize their names, will be joining us in future sessions to teach us more. So a lot of exciting things are going to happen in the next few weeks. That is to brace all of you and also remind you that if you ever have any feedback, it's most welcomed. So I was trying to think of the prerequisites. In my preparation, I spent my time over the holidays going through the book, and I've made it around to the 10th or 11th chapter. I think it's fair to say that some Python knowledge is sufficient, which means if you spent any amount of time that's more than 5 hours coding in Python, you would be good. A GPU environment is helpful. You don't need to set up a new one. I really like ranting about this, so I'm going to emphasize by stopping sharing my screen. It's really easy to become a system administrator as a machine learning engineer. I have this box of 3 graphic cards here that I've set up aspiring to become a good cackler. And it takes a huge pain to maintain all of these libraries. If you've ever installed any dependencies, it is quite painful to maintain it, keep it updated. There are a lot of errors. So the reason why I mentioned this, you want to learn Keras, or I'm assuming if you're part of this session, you want to become better at machine learning, become better at deep learning. I failed at this because of becoming a better system administrator, where I, go away, try how to install something inside of a Docker container, try how to update my CUDA environment. And in that process, I was going away from writing code in Keras or PyTorch, which was my true end goal. So my reminder to you all is, please don't be a Sayyam. Please don't spend time doing that. Remember, the path of least resistance is really helpful. People debate a lot about different paid options. Should you spend $50 per month on a provider? Should you spend $200? 200 is a little high, let's say 100. If you want to learn something and if you aspire to be in this field, I think that's a small price that's totally fine to pay. So instead of setting that up, or instead of fighting with yourself what option to get, this was a long-winded rant to encourage you to settle on one option and stick with that. So start with Colab. It's for free. Go to, just look up Colab and you should head over there. It gives you, I think, a good amount of compute for 12 hours. That should keep you going for at least the first few chapters. My pro chai tip is to spend twice as much time playing with code as compared to reading. I used to always be the kid that would, at least in the classroom, raise my hand. So, ma'am, why is this like? So, what is this like? So, how is it like? So, I like being that with code. And that's one thing I would encourage everyone. Please play around with code as much as you can. So, I'll try to summarize 2 key concepts from the first chapter, and the rest are quite self-explanatory. This is a screenshot from the incredible deep learning book by Ian Goodfellow. But whenever someone mentions AI, it's this broader overlook of quite a bit of techniques. And as you can see, deep learning is a very small subset of that. I'll take my sip of chai while I'll let everyone look at this. My strategy of staying hydrated is to drink chai every few minutes. Not the best in the world, I'll admit. So in the first few chapters, or in the first 2 chapters, the author Francois explains different techniques inside of AI. Machine learning broadly also encompasses or goes beyond deep learning itself. Deep learning primarily consists of neural networks that are a form of representation learning. There is a neat explanation where in one of the chapters, it's explained like every layer transforms the understanding of what is happening inside of a neural network. For that, I'd like to point everyone to a paper by Zeiler and Fergus. I'm trying to, again, as a reminder, I'm trying to summarize the key points from the first few chapters here. I'll give this a minute to load, but this paper shows you what is being learned inside of a CNN. If you don't know what a CNN is, it's a form of deep learning model. I'll use the word model here very vaguely to describe things beyond and everywhere. But it's a model that works with images, and it learns what's inside of an image. It helps you classify if an image has chai or not chai, hot dog or not hot dog. It can tell you where inside of the image there's a cup or a human, for example. That is a class of problem inside of image classification. It's called object detection, object localization, if you want to dive into that. If you don't know these terms, I'm just throwing these out there to seed in your heads different topics that we'll keep coming back to. I like the form of spaced repetition and coming back to different topics. And I also like throwing jargon around, waving my hands. So that is why I'm doing that right now. And this is still loading. So I'll resort to Google Images where I saw image that could make my job easy. There we go. So inside of a neural network, this point was made in one of the chapters. But every layer transforms the previous input a bit. And inside of a deep learning model, you have a lot of layers. So this model is a CNN, which, as I mentioned, works with images. And here we're trying to, let's say, work with the ImageNet dataset, which is one of the most recognized datasets in computer vision. Our end goal is to be able to tell what is inside of the image and classify it with one of the classes that is there. What is a class? It's inside of a data set. There are different options that exist. It could be a dog, cat, car. There are all of these labels that are classes, and our end goal is to detect what's inside of this image. So the earlier layers learn edges of the objects. And as you start going into depth, they start learning about the shapes. I'm sorry, I'm zooming in and it's not being useful here, but I'll share this link afterwards. Afterwards, the model starts to learn shapes. So first it's just edges. Later in layer 3 and 4, it becomes circles, rectangles. And furthermore, it gets closer and closer to object. So inside of a deep learning model, we're learning all of these representations. Not we, our model is learning all of these representations. So when we mention deep learning, it's this process of learning these details. There are also different formats or different models that you'll come across. Machine learning also consists of decision trees, gradient boosted trees. If you'd like to check those out, I would highly encourage you to go to kaggle.com, go to the code section, and you can look up XGBoost, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of good examples that you can start playing around with. Or you can look up LightGBM, and you'll find good examples. One thing that Kaggle does really well is these are sorted, or these return with a number of upvotes. Usually a number of upvotes also reflects how good is a tutorial. So please head over here if you want to check any of these out, start playing around with it. And that's how you can get a taste of LightGBM, XGBoost. These are the quote unquote traditional learning techniques of machine learning. Deep learning consists of mostly neural networks. I'm sorry to anyone who already knew that, but this is for anyone who's totally new to deep learning, which is also part of the target audience of this incredible book. The main thing that sets apart deep learning from traditional machine learning is you need to handcraft a lot of features. So we just looked at this image. The key thing is we just set one metric, which is the loss. Sorry, I'm mixing the jargon here, but inside of the neural network, we tell the neural network, please minimize your loss. And by itself, it's quite a painful process, but simplified enough. By itself, with just one loss to optimize, the neural network starts learning all of these techniques. That's what makes deep learning so powerful. Compared to traditional machine learning, you had a lot of features that you would be required to handcraft. You would require to detect edges by yourself. Anyone who's worked with OpenCV can tell you need to do edge extraction, you need to do Gaussian blurring, you need to from there run a PCA on top of it to do something similar. And the reason why that's not as effective anymore is because it fails with a huge number of classes. So if you look at Tesla's autopilot, that has possibly hundreds of thousands of classes, right, that it could understand on the road. And that's where deep learning really shines. So it's really good with the huge number of examples. And I think from here, these are the two theoretical points I wanted to cover from the first three chapters. I'll switch over to sharing my screen again and going to the Colab. In the meantime, I'll look at the questions to see if there's any questions in regards to this. Awesome. I'll just quickly connect my writing pad to explain concepts and reshare my screen. I don't see any questions, so I'll continue in 1 second. I also want to point everyone to one interesting clip that I found. LENet by Yann LeCun was the first architecture that revolutionized convolutional neural networks, again, a type of deep learning models. I saw this clip on Twitter where Yann LeCun was demoing the first CNN model. That does look like him. This was one of the revolutionary moments, honestly, in the field of deep learning, and CNNs took off about 30 years later or 20 years later. So you can go through the details in the book from here, but that's all of the history I wanted to cover. Before starting with the examples, I want to point everyone to the incredible keras.io website. It's quite simple to remember. So you all can head over to keras.io where you can find all of the details. I would encourage you to go through these examples and also guides to get started. And eventually we'll also be looking at different applications through here. This is quite thorough and detailed, and I would highly encourage everyone to spend a lot of time on here. So from there, I want to start by covering chapter 2, 3, 4, and hopefully 5 as well today. I'll run through the code and explain any blocks that are of importance. So the first bit in chapter 2 is creating a model, and we look at what's happening inside of it. So Keras has this nice datasets functionality, and from there we'll quickly import MNIST. What I'm doing here is, and can anyone please quickly reply in the chat if this is clear to everyone, or should I zoom in? Is the text size good enough for everyone? I'm sorry, I'm using a monitor, so I can't be 100% sure. I didn't get any responses, but I'll check again. I'll assume it's good. So to look at what all data sets are available inside of this, I quickly did a dir by importing it. This is a way to print what's inside of a function. And remember, if you ever want to look at what's happening inside of a function or what does the function do, Colab is similar to Jupyter Notebooks in some sense, not similar in some ways. if you put a question mark before a function, it should give you the doc string of the function. And if you want to look at the source code, if you're feeling brave that day, you can put 2 question marks, which will give you the source code of the function. A lot of people have replied, the text is looking good. Thank you. I'm sorry for the awkward pause. The live stream takes a bit of delay to show you guys. So that's why I had to pause there, but thank you all for the confirmation there. So whenever you're working with code, I mentioned earlier, I used to be the kid who used to always ask questions inside of a class. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing like so? I would encourage you to try that with code. So if this is the first time you're playing around with any deep learning framework, change everything. Change every single value. Look what does mnist.load data do? Look at the functional arguments. How does this work? Okay, so this takes me to the MNIST homepage. It's a part of Keras dataset, and it has a bunch of assert statements. If you are also if you also feel that assert is a daunting statement, start by looking that up. Instead of focusing your time, which has been one of my mistakes of my career, of looking at papers, looking at theory, spend more time playing with code. I will, and any one of you who's joined my previous sessions with PyTorch or otherwise would remember I always keep coming back to this point, because I personally, and I've seen this many times with people, have failed repeatedly to code more and end up always looking at theory. So please don't be like me in that way. So here I print out all of the data sets. If you are new to machine learning, CIFAR 10 and 100 are also one of the most widely used data sets. Boston Housing was from a Kaggle competition that displayed the houses inside of Boston area and their prices. This used to be a competition on Kaggle. Now it's just a hello world of deep learning. Let's look that up and see if we can find that. Not comments, I want to find the... I'm trying to find the competition. Let's see. I see a lot of house prediction competitions that might have this data set, but Kaggle had hosted this competition a long time ago, and this data set comes from there. Fashion MNIST is similar to the classic MNIST dataset that we have just imported, but it has fashionable objects. IMDb consists of movie reviews, and that's an example of collaborative filtering where we create a recommender system. And you can also look up Reuters dataset. If you try to print any dataset detail inside of the API, it should give you the details. I see a few comments around they can't see the live stream. I'm assuming it's visible to everyone, but the only requirement we have is to use Chrome. I'm sorry, this is a side note. We're using this platform for our events because we've had issues with Zoom, and sometimes you all wouldn't get a notification. So I know it's quite different to use, but sorry about the troubles here. So the thing you should always do after importing any data set, and what's going on here is we've called mnist.load function, load data function. And this has done something magical. It's returned train images and train labels and test images and test labels. So MNIST is a data set that consists of handwritten characters from 0 to 9. And we need to be able to find a way to load these into a computer and hand that off to Keras to be able to do black magic or machine learning. So one good thing to do is always look at the shape of tensors after importing them. So this becomes a tensor, and we'll quickly look at what is a tensor after this example. It is kind of a chicken and egg problem. If you're new to these concepts, you need to understand what it's doing to understand its definition. So we'll come back to the definition in 1 minute. But looks like this has a size of 60,000 by 28 by 28. So what's going on here is all of us hopefully have HD screens right now. They are 1920 by 1080 in size. These images are quite old, from the 90s. So they have just a size of 28 by 28. So the training images are of this size, and there's about 60,000 of them. If we print the length of the labels, it should match with the images, and yes, it does. So it's always good to run such tests inside of your code. And we can take a look at the labels as well. So the first image is 5, the second image is second image is 0, third image is number 4. Looks like these are from 0 to 9. If you like, you can also investigate further, try to print out different values, look at what's going on inside of there, two different things. But I won't do that. That's again some suggested work for you. At this point, the old Sayyam would look up MNIST and start reading the paper. Instead of doing that, print these things, see what's happening inside of the dataset. Remember, as your job of a machine learning engineer, you need to spend time coding in Python and producing things that are of interest to stakeholders, and not always processing academic work, which is important, but not in the first few milestones of your career. I'm sorry, I'll always prefix this warning to everyone, at least for the first 2-3 live streams. So sorry if it gets annoying to everyone, but I really want you all to avoid this path. The next thing we do is we need to create a model. So we import Keras from TensorFlow, and from there we import layers as well. Let's see what all layers exist inside of Keras. So if I do dir layers, would that give me all of the layers? It should. Yes, it does. Now, these are the things you should be trying. Here we're creating a simple neural network on the simple data set, which will perform really well. I'm giving you a spoiler, sorry. But it will perform really well here. Try changing the layers. What is, I'm curious, what is global max pooling 1D? Let's head over to keras.io. And I'm on the search documentation part. I'll search global max pooling 1D. Let's see what does that give me. Okay, that gives me details of the API. Takes me to this page. So global max pooling operation for 1D temporal data. Downsamples the input representation by taking the maximum value over time dimension. This doesn't make sense to me right now. So from here, what I would do is copy this example and run it and see if it makes sense. After doing that and after playing around with a bit, you start forming these mental maps. Spend more time inside of the documentation, try changing values. Let's also take another example that would be relevant and would make me look like an idiot. So let me see if I can pick that one. Let's see, let's look at tens. So let me try searching tens. I see the tens layer up top. Just your regular densely connected neural network. This makes sense to me. I'll wave my hands to confirm. I wave my hands strongly, so I know this. Dense implements the operation output is equal to activation. So we're passing a dot product of the input with the kernel, adding a bias to it, and passing it through an activation function. That is what a dense layer does. From there, I'd like to run the example and see what does that do. So that is another suggestion for you all to try, but I really like this approach. So what do we do here? We create a sequential model. So these layers, any input that goes through passes through these sequentially. We create a dense layer of 512 neurons. And we create an activation function ReLU. We call activation function ReLU here. I had an interesting slide around this. Let me see if I can bring that up. This is one easy way. I had this printed a long time ago. After a time, I was able to memorize all of these. But this is from Cifix.com. And these are all of the activation functions. If I remember, Sebastian Ruder had a nice blog around activation function. Sorry, it was around optimization algorithms, which we'll also look at. But if you want to remember activation functions, this is a nice picture to probably download or take a printout of. That's how I remember these. This is the graph that's being shown. So ReLU is defined like so. If anything is negative, set it to 0. If anything is more than that, it remains like so. So on and so forth. I would encourage you to look at this picture for remembering the details. I'm sorry, it always takes me too long and I feel nervous while switching sharing screens. I'm also embarrassed of sharing inappropriate things. So we set a sequential model, and the first activation function is ReLU. The second one is softmax. Inside of the book, Francois talks about why do we need activation functions and why are these required. It's proven in the chapter. I'll leave you to trying it. But if you don't add any activation function, no matter how many dense layers you set, with some mathematical magic, they can be changed to one single dense layer. So that's why we require activation function. And in the end, we're trying to predict from 10 classes. So we set it to 10. I pointed you all to the blog post by Sebastian on optimization algorithms, and RMS prop is one of them. So to train our model, first of all, we need to tell it what loss it needs to minimize. And the thing we care about, our imaginary job has asked us to create a model that is of the highest accuracy. And to earn a fictional amount of $20,000, we need a high accuracy on this. High is defined as more than 90%. So we tell our model, we care about the accuracy. We set the loss as categorical cross entropy. And we set the optimizer as RMS prop. And we compile the model. What does compile do? Let's take a look. So I again go over to the keras.io documentation. This looks like the link to it. So it says it configures the model for training. That makes sense. We're configuring our model for training. We are passing it the optimizer, passing it a loss. We can also pass it matrix. We can also do other things that we'll come back and take a look at. So right now, we pass an optimizer, we pass a loss function, and you can read these details to understand what they are or what the options are. Now, one thing we need to do here is our original train underscore images. Yes. Its data type was integer. To be able to do deep learning, we need to perform some matrix magic and also some calculus magic. We need to take derivatives. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. And we need to be able to differentiate these. These values usually become or come under decimal. So for that reason, we want this to be of a floating data type. And also we need to normalize this. So we need to present this in a format that our computer can really work with. For that reason, we perform these changes. And now we're good to fit our model. So what we do here is, let's take a look first. What does fit do? Another, instead of doing this, you could also press A, which adds a cell here, put a question mark. No, sorry, this wouldn't work because it's tied to this function, but let me give it a try. If this would give up the arguments. Yes, it does. So we can look at the signature here. Um, Trains the model for a fixed number of epochs, iterations on a data set, and it tells us what all can it accept as an input, this function. So I leave you to checking that out. But we pass our images, labels, we request our model, please take a look at this for 5 times. We'd like a batch size of 128, please. And we run this. Looks like we just got that good promotion at our fictional job because we got to 98% accuracy on the training data set. Or did we? So this accuracy is on the data set on which we have trained. To judge how good of a model this is, we need to look at the test data set where we'll, surprise, test our accuracy. So for that, we evaluate our model and let's take a look at what does that do. Question mark model dot evaluate. Returns the loss in value for the model in test mode. So now we've trained the model and we've put it in a test mode, unsurprisingly. We evaluate it on the test images and test labels. It's slightly lesser accurate, and we can say it's being overfit a bit. You can read in the book, this is described in quite detail, what is overfitting versus underfitting. Overfitting happens when your model just remembers the example it's been shown and doesn't work in the real world, or examples outside of the ones it's seen in the training data set. So that is one thing that you should always watch out for. But this was a 101 introduction to creating deep learning models. From here, the book goes into details of representation for neural networks. So I'll start taking a look at that and let me see if there are any questions. Awesome. I've run out of chai, so now I've resorted to water for staying hydrated. Sadly, we should continue at looking at data representation. And these are details of what is a tensor. TensorFlow is called TensorFlow because tensors are a really important part of machine learning, deep learning. So it's important to look at the definitions of the same. Scalars are rank 0 tensors. What is a rank? Simply put, it's the number of dimension for now. You can assume it to be so. So a single number has no dimension. It's a scalar. There's this incredible library NumPy from where we create an array of a single number, and that has a dimension of 0. So it's a 0 rank tensor. Vectors, or this at first, if you're coming from maths, is a bit confusing. This is a matrix, right? In math, it's a matrix of shape 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 1. But here it's a vector. So a vector is a rank 1 tensor. Why is it rank 1? Because when we ask NumPy, hey NumPy, what is the dimension of X? It's 1. Matrices in machine learning are rank 2 tensors, which means they have 2 dimensions. So what are the 2 dimensions here? They are length and breadth. That's one way to remember it. My video, the one you're seeing right now, is RGB. And hopefully on your wonderful screen, I'm looking good. Hopefully, that's a long stretch. But this has a length, a height, and 3 channels. Images are RGB. Those are 3 defining characteristics. You can define any color with a combination of RGB values. If you've ever worked on a website, you can define a hex value that will take care of things. But the point being, if you're working with images, they would have a rank of 3. And if you are passing on an image to a neural network, it will have a rank of 4. Why is that? Let me bring up OneNote to make a point here. And I'll write here to make a point. Sorry, I'm quickly switching my screen and launching OneNote. Cool. Pick up, draw, find a pen. So an image would be length by width by channels. Let's say in an ideal world where my internet is working really well, this is the size of the matrix or vector or tensor that your computer is processing. If we want to pass this to your neural network, we would ideally, let's say you're trying to train on a bunch of images and you want to find out in which one a human exists or not. Ideally, you would create a batch of these. So let's say you decide on 128. So you would pass an array of 128 images of 1920 by 1080, having 3 channels in it. So notice what's happening here. This is the channel. This is the height. Sorry, I'm mixing up the terminology. This is the length, and these are the number of examples inside of a batch. This is known as the channel last notation. Keras works with both. Some libraries also like the channel first notation. So you would have the channel by batch, by length, by width. This is how you would do, pardon my handwriting, but this is how you would denote a tensor to Keras. It's important to look at this because a large part of deep learning is a lot of matrix or tensor operations. So that point being made, let me switch back to the notebook. And as a reminder, I know I'll get this question in the future, so to save myself the trouble, this is from the books GitHub repository. And if you want to find the link to it, I'll just look up GitHub, deep learning with Python. The first link is the one you want. So fchole/deep learning with Python notebooks. These are the notebooks I've uploaded to my Colab, and those are the ones I'm working with. So now we know all about tensors, and let's see if you want to check out any other details. One thing of importance here is NumPy makes it really easy to work with tensors because you have these functions that you can perform. One of those is slicing a tensor, where you can grab the examples from 10 to 100 like so. So my slice would have 90 examples, and these would be from 10 to 90. This would do the same, and a colon would tell you, hey, I just want all of the stuff in here. That's all. If you don't pass any values before or after, I remember it as a stopper on either end. So please stop or start with 10. So these are the boundaries, 10 to 100. If there's no number here, that means no boundary. It's everything. So if you pass a simple colon, it'll return everything. So this is how we can grab the same. This is also one of the techniques. So if the boundaries are the first and last number, you get the same. Few more interesting ways of slicing. So you can just mention one boundary as well. That works too. You can have a negative number here as well, which means this will start from here and move back 7 numbers. So the boundaries would be defined like so. And in the book, it basically, this is a method of grabbing the middle 14 pixels inside of an MNIST image. That's how it's defined as. we can grab a batch of the training images like so. So our first batch is from 0 to 128. Second batch could be from 128 to 256. And that's how we can grab all of the batches. So I just told you how can you represent a tensor for images. This can be extended to video as well. Let me go back to my wonderful OneNote to continue elaboration with my poor handwriting. And I apologize in advance for the pain you all have to go through to read my handwriting. So a video, and the question here is, how do we represent a video to a neural network? Let's say, what does a video have? A video is a set of images, right? So what does an image have? It's a 1920. I hope aliens can't read this. That's why my handwriting is so messed up. Uh, the image you see right now has a width, this time I'm correct with the notation, of 1920, a length or a height of 1080, and 3 channels. But this is just an image, right? As you can see, I'm moving around. So this is a sequence of images. What is that? Those are frames. So it's a collection of images. Let's say in every second, if you're on a good connection, you're getting 60 frames. So this is 1 second of the video. And let's say you want to train your model on, I don't know, 4 seconds of the video. So this is the batch size. Why do we need a batch? If, and as you multiply this, I think this becomes 1, 2, 3, 3. This goes on to the order of 1,000,000 numbers, and a few, or even if a few 100,000 numbers represented as float 32 would become in the order of half a GB. So modern graphic cards go from 10 GB to 24 GB. Beyond that, if you've seen cards bigger than that, you have a lot of money. Modern cards have this range. And if you want to fit an entire video or a set of images, you would probably have to select a few portions of them to be able to work with them. Your models aren't trained on the graphic card, and their memory is a limiter of what you can work with. So to limit what we can work with, we create a batch size that can fill whatever memory we have. If we're rich, it could also be 320 GB, where you'll have 4 graphic cards of 80 GB. Yep, that sounds about right each. And you could have a really large batch size. So going back to the initial point, this is how video is represented in memory. That's another example. Switching back to the Colab, inside of the chapter, they also go through how can you represent time series data and vector data. I'll leave you all to check those out. Now, to emphasize on the point how powerful is NumPy, if you want to add a number to a matrix, right? Let's say so this is your matrix A. And this would be a type. This has no type because it's a Python list right now. But if we make this as a NumPy array, it's a NumPy. I'm forgetting quite embarrassingly, I'm forgetting how to print the D type. But I want to make a point. If you want to add one number to all of these elements, you can simply do a plus one and it gets added to all of the elements. If we live in a dark world where we don't have this, we'll get an error because we can't do this operation. This is known as broadcasting. So Python, NumPy has something known as BLAS, which I'll encourage you to look up, but not go into a lot of details. With a lot of C magic, C language magic, all of these operations are taken care of in a very fast manner. And if we're working with Keras, these can be done on the GPU. That's what makes it really powerful, these abstractions. So the point being proven here is, this is known as broadcasting. And here we compare how tedious, how annoying our code would be if we don't have broadcasting. So later in the chapter, we defined a naive ReLU, which basically does ReLU, but quite naively. And you have to loop over all of the elements and perform a ReLU. So we loop over the entire range of X and we get the max and then return it. Unlike the very convenient way of simply calling ReLU on X, like so. We also define a naive add and we take a look later on which is faster. Quite unsurprisingly, the NumPy ones are faster because of something known as BLAS, which makes everything optimized and works really well. Inside of your compiler, some matrix magic is happening and this code is being vectorized. But for the simplicity, you can remember this as broadcasting. So these operations are broadcasting. Further, this point is shown by dot products. We define different functions. I'm glancing over them because they're quite straightforward. We also look at how can we reshape tensors. So let's say if you have an array like so, and if you want to reshape it to an array of 6 by 1 dimension, you can simply pass it to reshape and it'll basically transform this into the same. In the book, they also discuss of how can you change the image, how can you rotate the image, how can you move the image around. I'll encourage you to check that out. That is quite straightforward. Strong hand wavy argument here. Again, sorry if you're new to the field of deep learning, feel free to follow up with these questions, but I'm assuming it's familiar with everyone. Now we come to the crux of what makes neural networks work. So let me find my presentation if I can in a short minute. I did manage to find it and let me pull up the correct slide. So the power of deep learning is summarized in these 5 steps, just these 5 steps that we need to do. Once we have the data set, we can simply visualize it, start with a simple model, split it, and iterate till the first model fits without tampering with the model at all. The magic of how a model learns lies inside of a lot of calculus magic and matrix multiplication. So we've looked at matrix multiplications and operations we can perform with that. Now we need to look at derivatives and how do we operate on the same. So usually when you're working with numbers, usually you would have a graph in a high dimensional space. This is 2D, obviously. To be able to operate on this or to be able to correct your loss. So remember our model. Let me create a new page. So our model gets some input and gives an output. Initially, these outputs would be garbage because our model would be bad. To improve our model, we pass back a loss, and this is updated using an optimizer. So when we said Keras to please compile a model, and we passed the loss and optimizer, we were basically defining this image. After doing this a bunch of times, we get a good model. But we need to understand, how does this happen? So how do we adjust the loss? Let's say this is our loss and we want to minimize it. So we calculate the slope at this point. And if you've paid attention, unlike me in Calculus 101, you can do so by, let's say this is y and x, and this is the point x dash. You can find the slope there by doing dy by dx, taking a derivative at the point x dash. So what do? We update our model weights with a learning rate from the gradient of the loss. And we set how aggressively do we want to update it. So for that, you need to be able to get the loss and get the gradient of it at a certain point. Inside of Keras, this is done with gradient tape. And if you look on the API, you can find details over here. It records the operations for automatic differentiation. So we don't have to do the painful process of differentiating manually. It is automatically taken care of. And operations are recorded when they are executed. So further in the chapter, gradient tape is defined. And we define a simple function y is equal to 2 multiplied by x plus 3. If we want to calculate the gradient at this point, we can simply call tape dot gradient y comma x. And this would calculate the derivative of y with respect to x. You can look furthermore into this example from the book. That's what I wanted to point out. And then we go back and take another look at our initial example. We do something exciting afterwards, which is we re-implement what we did earlier from scratch in TensorFlow. And this time we define a naive tens class. So we don't have the convenience of simply calling from keras.layers. From keras.layers. We don't have that convenience anymore. So we will have to define it manually. And this time, instead of using all of the goodness, we define the shape of our weights, their initial value, which comes from tf.random.uniform. Let's take a look at what that is. Copy. Paste. Not found. This outputs random values from a uniform distribution. If you want to look up what is uniform distribution, you can continue down that rabbit hole, but we initialize our vector randomly. We set the weights to a variable with the initial value, and we set the bias like so. From there, we define a call. So whenever we call naive dens, it would return a matrix multiplication of the weights at the bias and pass it through an activation layer. From there, we define a nice sequential class, and now we can define our model similarly. Furthermore, we also define a batch generator. So we don't have the convenience of calling model.compile anymore, and we can continue like so. And then we define all of the ways of updating the weights, a single training step. How do we perform the update using the optimizer, and how do we apply the gradients? And finally, fit the model. So creating this from scratch, and I would encourage you to spend more time here. It's quite self-explanatory. I'm glancing over it. Would help you appreciate how simplified Keras makes our lives. So you don't have to go through all of this process manually, and we'd still get to a similar accuracy after doing the same. Actually, we don't, and that is a good homework to evaluate on why don't we get a similar accuracy when doing the same thing. But inside of the second chapter, the first chapter is more about the theoretical background of machine learning and deep learning. The second chapter gives you the building blocks mathematically and also the details around deep learning. The third chapter is an introduction to Keras and TensorFlow, and noticing that we're 4 minutes away from the deadline, I don't want to go overboard. I would again encourage everyone to run these notebooks ahead of time. We'll continue from here next week. So the third chapter is an introduction to Keras and TensorFlow. And next week, we'll aim to finish up until chapter 7, where we'll actually start working in Keras. So let me stop sharing my screen and announce something exciting. With the most monotonous tone, if I may, but this is quite interesting, and I hope everyone is as excited about this. I want to announce 27 days of Keras. I have always wanted to make my own dent in the universe. So instead of using 30 days of Keras, I'm doing something really innovative, 27 days of Keras, where if you want, I would invite you to spend 15 minutes to 24 hours every single day for the next 27 days. I say playing with Keras because it should be like playing to you. This is not work. This is what we'll do for enjoyment. And I invite you to share what you learn. So I'm sorry to everyone who knows deep learning. This session, I'm assuming, wouldn't have given you much knowledge. But if this was your first introduction to deep learning, I hope this made sense, first of all, to you. But I would invite you to share anything that you might have learned here. We all start from somewhere, and we all have a lot of things to learn. Share it on Twitter, write a blog around it, and tweet with the hashtag 27 days of Keras. Tag me or tag Weights and Biases. And every single week, to encourage all of you, we'll be sending over swag and a few more things, GPU credits, to the best submissions. So in an effort to encourage you all to, first of all, learn Keras and to get comfortable sharing your work, we'll have more stuff to share starting next week. I would really invite you to do this. And here are a few homework suggestions for you. Please consider checking out different data sets inside of the class, playing around with them. Go to keras.io. It's an incredible, quite clean website. Try to understand what gradient tape is. It took me a little bit longer. It's quite different from AutoGrad, which I know quite intuitively by now. So please try to understand that. Try all the parameters. I was doing a DIR where I was listing different options inside of Keras function. Try printing those, try playing around with those. And most importantly, write about these. Tag me, share it. We would love to share your work with the world. We don't have any ask from you here. At Weights and Biases, we genuinely want to create a community where we can provide the best learning materials for everyone. And hopefully I'm getting a little better at it with all of the lectures, but we sincerely want you to get better at sharing, learning, and sharing your work with the world. So I highly encourage you to do this. And I'll take a look at any of the questions. If not, I'll mention what we'll be learning next week. We've gone through the first 2 chapters. For the next session, we'll aim for chapter 3 to 7. And from there, we'll cover 2 chapters every week. So this will be a 4 or 5 week adventure that I hope everyone will join me on. Again, as a reminder, please consider doing these homeworks, consider joining 27 days of Keras. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next week at the same time. Also, huge thanks to Francois for joining us earlier. Anyone who's watching right now, yes, we are recording this session, and the recording will be made available in 4 or 5 days. Earlier than that, if I decide not to sleep. Thanks for joining. I'll end the session here, and I look forward to learning with you all next week.